Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa and today I'm doing my April wrap-up. So it'll be everything that I read in April except for the 7 Ace books that I reviewed a couple of videos ago. I'm still a bit tired, but I'm better than I was last week. You can tell because I did my nails. So the first one was way back at the beginning of the month and I'm having to reach back kind of hard for my memories of that one. It was The Girl Who Drank the Moon. This is a middle grade book that is a little bit dystopian. Weirdly enough, it's a fantasy, but about half of it takes place in this little town called a protectorate where they have a very dystopian little society with very corrupt leaders and a lot of hidden secret stuff going on. And the other half takes place in this forest by a bog where a witch lives with her bog monster and her itty bitty dragon. And the story starts when the people of the protectorate offer up a baby as a sacrifice to this witch because of their evil government that wants babies dead for its own reasons. And this witch usually picks up the babies and takes them to towns across the forest where they can be taken care of. But this time she decides to keep the baby. And in fact, because the baby is quite weak when she picks her up, she feeds her the moon. It started out with the witch pulling down starlight to feed to the baby, and then she accidentally fed her some of the moon as well, because that's how magic works in this world. And the moon has very powerful magic, so this little girl started to manifest very powerful magic that was too much for her and had to be taken care of by the witch. And we go back and forth between following this little girl as she grows up to following a boy who was about 13 when she was taken to the forest, who grows up in the protectorate, and we get to see what's going on there. And he has some connections to the government because his uncle is high up, and so we kind of gradually learn about the inner workings of this place. I listened to this one in audiobook form, and the voices that the narrator did for the itty bitty dragon and the bog monster were really fun and cute, and I just really enjoyed those characters. This was very complicated and had a lot of deep issues that I was looking at, which is what I really like in middle grade. This one was very well plotted out and very intricate, and I could never tell where it was going next because the magic system was very mysterious at first and kind of proceeded to be mysterious because it worked in ways that the protagonists and the people who were explaining magic to us didn't even understand. The main conflict of the story, of course, is that this town is sacrificing babies and that our little girl who drank the moon is separated from her mother, in addition to having all this magical power that she can't handle. So we follow the various threads of the story as they try to resolve all those different issues. I really enjoyed it, found it very creative, and would love to read more from this author. Then I listened to the audiobook of Binti, which was very short. I think the audiobook was only 2.5 hours. And it is about a girl who is on a planet that is not Earth, but I think that she and her people are called Terrans, which makes me think that they were colonists from Earth, but that might also just be a word for humanoid. Anyway, their culture has changed quite a bit from Earth's culture since they've been away, if they were ever from Earth. I'm not sure if all of the people on her planet are of African descent, but Binti and her family are, and they have this interesting cultural thing where they mix a sort of clay that they have on their planet into their hair, and I think coat their skin with it, which I believe is why the cover is like it is with the stripes on the face. And Binti is someone who wants to go to a school back on Earth, but there is a lot of angst between her planet and Earth. They don't like each other. The people from Earth really look down on them, and so her people resent that and look down on the Earthen people in turn. So her family doesn't want her to go to this school, but she feels that is the only way to make what she wants of her life. So she applies in secret and then gets accepted and doesn't tell her parents about that until she is safely away by smuggling herself out on a transport. The main plot of the story takes place en route to the academy because her ship is attacked by hostile aliens who do not have a way to communicate with either people from Earth or people from Binti's planet, and they are very powerful. And so the story is mostly about Binti figuring out how to communicate with these aliens and save herself and avert further disaster. So this is a sci-fi space opera. It is mostly isolated to this one ship, and we only really get a lot of interaction with this one alien species, but it is a really interesting alien species. They're like air floating jellyfish, if I'm remembering that correctly. And I liked that the key way that she was able to interact with these aliens was because of this clay stuff she put on her hair, and so it's something special that no one who wasn't from her planet would have been able to do. I felt it was resolved a little bit too easily. I feel like it makes use of the idea that a lot of villains are just misunderstood, and if you could just communicate with your enemies and explain your point of view, that you could come to a mutually beneficial understanding. And I believe that's true in some cases, but I also believe that in a lot of cases that's not true, especially when things have already gotten violent. And so I didn't enjoy the ending too much, but I did enjoy a lot of things about it, and this novella is the beginning of a series, I believe, so I would like to continue it. Throughout the month, I was mood reading 2 more books from the Pandora series, Pandora Gets Vain and Pandora Gets Lazy. These stories follow a 13-year-old Pandora who accidentally opened the box and is now on a quest to put all of the evils back in the box after they have been spread throughout the world. So in Pandora Gets Vain, we go to Egypt and interact with the mythology there, because while Greek mythology is a big thing in this story and we have met most of the Olympians, there are also other mythos included in this story, and we get to meet some of the ancient Egyptian gods as well. And these books have kind of a case of what happened in Xena Warrior Princess, where they drew from a lot of very old mythology and a lot of very old historical events, but a lot of them happened at least several hundred years apart, if not thousands of years apart. So mortals obviously couldn't have been at both events within a couple of years. And so we have a specific real world historical figure in Cleopatra in this Egyptian story. And so when you look at the rest of the societies that you meet in the first and third books, they probably would not have been in that state during Cleopatra's life. But I don't really mind that. I think it's a lot of fun. I think you get more than you lose when you include a lot of historical figures from a long time ago, even if the timeline doesn't quite match up. In the third book, we traveled to some mountains where Atlas is holding up the sky, or maybe not holding up the sky because laziness has traveled to this area. And the way the evils work in these books is that they infest a particular person, and then Pandora has to rip them out or away from the person to stick them in the box. And so in number 2, it was infesting Cleopatra, and in number 3, it's infesting Atlas. And so Pandora and her cohorts have to figure out what to do when laziness is inhabiting this giant who's supposed to be holding up the sky, because the sky is actually falling. Also, we have added a character. We added him in book 2, and his name is Homer, and he is not the Homer. He is the descendant of the Homer, and he is very enjoyable. And I also really like the original trio of Pandora, Alcee, and Iole, being 2 13-year-olds and a 12-year-old girl. Iole is the nerdy one, and Alcee is more the girly girl, and also a very bossy one. And Homer is a big lunk with a good heart and medium good brain. And then Pandora is the crazy plan maker, a la Sokka from Avatar: The Last Airbender. These books also follow the classic fantasy quest method, where they are going from place to place to accomplish a certain thing, and a lot of adventures happen along the way, very much like Quest for Del Torah and Lord of the Rings. And that is a format that I just really enjoy. Hence, I'm writing a series just like that right now. So I enjoy them a lot. I really like the whirlwind trip through various societies' mythology and history. I didn't enjoy book 3 as much because the team is separated a lot, and that's just not as fun. I really like the interactions between the characters, and things are a bit more stressful They had a little bit harder time in this book than in others, but it's picking back up again a little happier in book 4, and I'm enjoying that a lot right now. Then I listened to The Curse of the Pharaohs, the second book in the Amelia Peabody series, and this has jumped 5 years forward from the previous book, so our lady is married and has a little toddler who is adorable, and the couple haven't been back out to Egypt since their son was born because they want to stay around and actually raise him, which I really appreciate. But they get called out finally to go and leave their son to go to Egypt. They don't send him to boarding school, by the way. I would disapprove much more heartily of that. They leave him with his aunt and uncle, who are very sweet and who we know from the first book. But they decide to leave because a murder has happened, or at least Peabody suspects that it's a murder. Emerson isn't so sure. He thinks it was an accidental death. But Peabody wants to investigate the murder, and the widow of the murdered person has personally asked Emerson to come and continue the dig that her husband was on because her husband supposedly asked specifically for Emerson before he disappeared. So once they get to Egypt, lots of shenanigans ensue. These are two very stubborn, strong-willed people, also quite eccentric. They get back together with some of the Egyptians they worked with before and start excavating a tomb that looks like it will be very exciting and might be a royal tomb. I don't think I've mentioned this video that this is set in like the 1890s, so that's why there are these British people tootling over to Egypt to do the Egyptology. And we have a somewhat similar plot to the first book in the series and also to one later in the series that I read first. So I think it's a common theme of these books where we have a sort of Scooby-Doo-like issue where there is a creepy monster slash ghost around and we have to figure out why someone is pretending to be a ghost slash zombie. And in this case, a bunch of murders go down, and so Peabody is in full Sherlock mode trying to figure out what the motivations are, who has an alibi, who has a motive, which of these murders was the original object and which are just a cover-up, all the while socializing with the widow who invited them and several American archaeologists who are in the area because there is like a season for archaeology, and so a bunch of archaeologists would be in Egypt at the same time doing other digs, and they would all socialize together because they have interests in common. And so in this book we meet Mr. Vandergilt from America, who is hilarious, and I actually remember him from the later on book that I read at first and really liked him there too, so it was really fun to see how he's first introduced. And I had a little bit more trouble following the mystery and the plot of this one because I think because it was audio, and while I enjoyed it a lot and it made my Sims decorating more enjoyable, I think I am more likely to lose threads when I listen rather than read. But I did eventually get a handle on all of the characters, and that was the most important part. There was some fat phobia in this one. There was a overweight character who had a bad personality and was not a nice person, but a lot of the negative comments that Peabody thinks are related to her body rather than her personality. And more so than direct comments, there's kind of a general way that writers sometimes talk about overweight people, like just using certain verbs for how they move and things like that rubbed me wrong. It wasn't a major part, but this character was there throughout the books, so it didn't really go away. Even though she was a relatively minor character, we didn't see her all the time. So that was a frustration. Other than that, I really loved it. Loved the characters, loved the motivations. This one takes itself, I would say, about as seriously as the Parasol Protectorate. Actually, something funny about that is, besides being set at approximately the same time in history, the women both really like to hit things with their parasols. And I could really see the two main characters being really good friends. I am still really enjoying the relationship between Amelia Peabody and her now husband, Emerson. They are adorable and they mainly interact by needling each other, and that's like one of my favorite ways to show affection. And so the genre, I would say, is mystery. I don't know how else to, I don't know if like Egyptology is like a genre where like stories about Egyptologists. I guess archaeology in general might be, because then you have like, what's his name? Indiana Jones, and I know there are a lot of stories about that, so maybe that's a genre and this would fit in with those. But I have definitely not read very many stories about archaeologists, let alone specifically Egyptologists, and so this is kind of in a rank of its own in my mind. It's also very hilarious, very sweet, and as I said, doesn't take itself too seriously. Then we have one I'll just mention briefly because I didn't like it. Duchess of My Heart was a romance that I just happened to see in my Kindle's library because my mom had gotten it. I think she got a deal on it, or I think it was written by an author she reads a lot. So I decided I'll just try that instead of rereading one of my other historical romances, Regency romances, because I was feeling a Regency romance mood. But I ended up really not liking it. It has never before published on the cover, which makes me think that it is an old story of this author's, and the author like dug it out of a closet somewhere and decided to publish it. That's complete conjecture, but it would explain the real lack of quality, because this is by Maya Banks, and she's like a big author that my mom has a lot of books from, and my mom's usually pretty picky. Plus, if you're that big of an author, your prose is a little higher quality than this. It was just, there was a lot of that thing where authors use more explicit verbs than they need to, like they sashayed across the room, when you really should have just said they went, and a lot of verbs for like talking, like instead of said, like she hardly ever used said, she used a bunch of other more creative verbs, which they will tell you to do in writing workshops, but is wrong because said is supposed to be an invisible word, you're supposed to skip past it, and every once in a while a verb like that is actually well used because you needed to explain that they said it in a certain way, but she like way overdid it. And then other things that I just didn't like, the romance, this was another one where I shipped the romance more at the beginning than at the end. Like, it just didn't make that much sense. It made sense they would originally be interested in each other, but once they got to know each other a lot, they didn't like fit together like puzzle pieces, like a lot of romances will have people, where people's hurts and people's weaknesses will meet other people's strengths and abilities to give, and so they can like give and take because of very unique personalities. They work well together. But in this story there was none of that, and also there was a lot of violence and upset. Whereas, you know, in a lot of romances there will be something where somebody is going to like attack the heroine or the hero because of some reason we have to save them, but we don't usually get graphic descriptions of beatings. Like, that's just not what I'm looking for when I'm going to a Regency romance. And I think a lot of people who read romance are looking for a comfort read. They're not looking for this daring action plot. And even action, there's just something particularly upsetting about the way that she had this heroine attacked. So I ended up really not liking that one. But I read it the whole way through because like I liked the beginning, and it just like the last 30% was super disappointing. Moving on, I also listened to the audiobook of Queens of Geek, which I've seen around on BookTube a fair amount, and I also saw it on someone's list of books with autism representation, and I have the link for that, so I should be able to link that below. But someone was doing an autism readathon during April, and so they made this huge list of books with autism rep, and it's a really great resource. I didn't pick very many books from it because there's not nearly as much fantasy, and I had already read 2 of the fantasy books that were on that list of like 5. But I decided to try Queens of Geek because someone said that it was set at a convention, like a geek convention, and it actually turns out it was a video convention, I think, because there were multiple YouTubers at it, and one of our main characters is a YouTuber, and she actually has a romance with another YouTuber. The autistic character is the friend of one of the YouTubers, and she goes along as like part of her posse, and I really enjoyed her. The representation was pretty explicit, but that made sense because this character is still trying to figure herself out, and so she needs a lot of words and processing to describe what's going on with her and talk about it with other people. Because part of the format of the book is, some of it is entries that she writes on her Tumblr where she talks about how she feels and her anxiety, and also about like everything that's going on in this con, because she's telling all her followers all the exciting things there, because that is one of the coolest things that you can vlog or blog about. I really enjoyed her romance. It was Friends to Love, which is one of my favorites, and the particular way that it was handled I just found really sweet, and it actually made me cry. And the other romance was kind of meh. It was a female-female romance, and as I said, it was between these two YouTubers, and in this case, it was actually a case of these two people's difficulties and emotional hurts kind of the opposite of worked well together, in that our protagonist had been hurt by a very public relationship in the past because she had dated another famous person, and it had been very public, and after their breakup, the fans who shipped them were really upset, whereas the woman she liked had been hurt in the past by people not being willing to be public about their relationship because the other person she was with was in the closet. And so one of them has an extra need to be private because they've been hurt by publicity, and the other has an extra need to be public because they've been hurt in the past by secrecy. And I wouldn't have minded that, except that I kind of felt like the story came down on the wrong side of it in the end, because being big into YouTube, I am aware of YouTubers' relationships, and I'm aware that pretty much all of the mature ones are very private about their relationships. Like, they usually keep them totally secret for like a year, and then are just generally not into the PDA ever after that, except some who are like married and who were married sometimes before even the channel started. But relationships, especially between two separate YouTubers who each have a fairly significant following, it would actually be really weird for that to be public, because fans are going to be weird about it. Like, I follow Dan and Phil, and their fans were horrendous to them about shipping them, and that's why they have been excessively private about their love lives. And they were private about it even before the fans started getting weird. They just got more private after that. So it seemed really weird to me that this other YouTuber actually expected this person who she just met at this convention to be willing to go public about their relationship the next day, because the entire story takes place during a weekend-long convention. And in the story, it comes to the conclusion that that's what they should do, and the person who needs to get over their thing is the one who wants to be private. And the story kind of acts like she's the one in the wrong and she needs to be willing to be public about this, which is totally not what I believe. And then there's the addition of these two women know each other from their videos because they watch each other's videos, but they've never reached out online to each other before. They've just like watched each other's videos silently, which, like, I do that with a lot of YouTubers before I like reach out to them, but usually if I've been following someone for like a year, I've probably commented on their videos, especially if they're about my size. But even the ones that are bigger, like, I don't comment like I expect them to talk back to me, but I do comment, and it just seems weird to me that they never connected before when they both talk about how much they enjoy each other's videos when they finally do meet, and then they just have this instant connection and they're like crazy about each other after a day and a half. And so the Friends to Love relationship made a lot more sense because they've known each other for a really long time, and we just needed a catalyst to change the nature of the relationship, whereas the other one has just appeared out of nowhere. But there are various other plots besides the romances, especially following our protagonist YouTuber getting over her other relationship because her ex is at the convention and she is having to do publicity events with him. And there's also a plot of the autistic character going to a superfan competition that is a combination of cosplay competition and a quiz about this book series that she's a huge fan of. And so there is a lot about how her anxiety affects that and how she would like to drop out because it's making her crazy. And she also meets another autistic person at this convention and they talk about it, and I really enjoyed that. And they really encourage each other, and both of them kind of depend on each other, so they both encourage each other to do this competition because both of them are nervous about it, and I really enjoyed that. And so for artistic representation and fun geekiness and one of the two romances, I give Queens of Geek a big thumbs up. And so the next book I finished was Princess Academy, and I got it from a Rex video full of middle grade fantasy Rex that I will try to find and link below. And it is about this little town in the mountains that is in a remote area of a country that is a monarchy. And in this little town, they mine linder, which is a special type of stone that is particularly sought after for building things in the rest of the country. So traders come up the mountain to get it, and one day along with these traders comes a royal emissary who says that some seers have divined that the prince's wife is going to come from this town, and so they're going to set up a princess academy nearby so that they can teach all the girls of this town to be proper ladies to marry the prince, which is a very weird way to run a royal dating program, but okay. And it is all about the girls of this little town. I think there's about 20 of them suddenly having access to an education which they never had before, and this academy bringing out good and bad things in each of the girls' characters. We follow one particular girl who has been not allowed to mine in the quarry because her father doesn't want her to, and we don't know why. We find out close to the end of the book. But she has felt weak and pathetic because of this all her life, because everyone else in the town, except really old people or little babies, works in the quarry. And so she's always felt the odd one out, and now she is thrust together with all these other girls from her home, and her relationships with these girls suddenly changes because she's not such the odd one out anymore. And they are all fish out of water in this academy. Our main character butts heads with the way over strict teacher, but decides that she wants to make the most of her education because she has felt so useless at home. She hopes that maybe by learning these things she can be useful in other ways and maybe in other places. There is a small amount of magic in these books called quarry speak, and we learn more about it as the book goes on, but it is something that only these people who live on this mountain are able to do. And so we see our main character exploring what it is and also exploring all this information in books, and at the same time navigating new different relationships with her peers. And I really enjoyed it. It was quite odd and had quite an odd concept, but I enjoyed the characters and the relationships and this magic system quite a bit. I also really enjoyed the ending and how this academy ended up affecting the village as a whole. Then we have Starry River of the Sky, which I just finished today. This is a differently formatted story that has a lot to do with storytelling. So there is a narrative going on following this boy named Nnedi, and it starts when he is kicked out of a cart that he has been stowed away in and left on the doorstep of this inn, and how he starts working as the errand boy for this inn and meets the innkeeper's daughter and the funky innkeeper and the weird old man that is usually a guest, and then this other really interesting lady comes in as a guest, and there's a storyline following that. And then there is also a bunch of stories told by these people, by Nnedi himself, by the mysterious guest, by the innkeeper's daughter, and all of these stories are also connected to each other and to the actual events of the current story about Nnedi, but not in really obvious ways. They're slightly hidden, and there's a lot of allegory, but also just mystery trying to figure out what's going on, because in the main storyline, another weird thing that has happened is the moon has disappeared, and Nnedi can hear someone moaning in the night, and he thinks it's the moon that's missing, and we don't know what's going on with that. And at first it seems like all these stories that are being told have nothing to do with the main storyline, and we have to gradually figure out how it all might be connected. And so these are all East Asian inspired stories, and it is set in East Asia, or at least a fantastical version of East Asia. And it was really fun to hear these fairy tales slash legends that I am completely unfamiliar with. And I also really liked how it was talking about the importance of stories and how they pass on information, but also can affect how we feel and how we react to our own lives. So I highly recommend it. It's kind of middle grade, but it's definitely complicated enough. I think it will hold the interest of the adult reader. Then I'll tell you a little bit about the other 4 books that I read. Moon Called, Bloodbound, Iron Kissed, and Bone Cross. These are all part of the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs, which I talked about last week, but I only talked about them briefly, so I'm going to say a few more things because I've read 2 more books since that video, because for some reason I can't seem to make any of these books last longer than a day. I just read it straight through until it's done. And I have just acquired the next book, Silverborn, from the library, so I know what I'm going to be doing the rest of the day. But basically it is a paranormal adventure series with a little bit of romance on the side, and I'm really enjoying the paranormal stories. So there are 3 main groups of paranormal creatures in these books, at least that we've encountered so far. Those are werewolves, vampires, and the Fae. And the Fae sums up a large quantity of different types of magical creatures, and they are my least favorite because they are the most secretive. And so when you're reading a book that centers on them, there is a lot of unnecessary lack of communication. You know how lack of communication is a really irritating trope. In this case, it makes sense and it's done well, but it's still really irritating. And so each book will center on a particular type of creature that Mercy interacts with most. The first book, it was werewolves. Second book, it was vampires. Third book, it was fae. And then fourth book, it was back to vampires. And so Mercy has friends and enemies in all of these groups, and there are usually several different plot threads going on at the same time, and they are mostly adventure slash mystery. So Mercy is always solving something bad that's going on. Often there will be murders or kidnappings, and she has to figure out what's going on because some of her friends from each of these groups are being threatened and she wants to help them. And so she gets in way over her head and has to solve really big problems, even though she is significantly less powerful than these other creatures, because the only magic she has is she can turn into a coyote, which is a lot smaller than a werewolf and a lot less indestructible than a vampire. And the Fae are generally even more powerful than either of those. Despite the romance being a minor thing, I really enjoy the romance in these books. It actually took till the 4th book for the people I wanted to get together to actually get together, and this is probably 9 months in book time. And so I actually really appreciate a relationship taking that long to evolve in books, because usually they evolve in a matter of weeks, if not days. And so I really like the slow burn of it. Also, there was a sort of love triangle slash quadrangle, but I really liked the way that it was handled, and I found it really relaxing that she only actually had romantic feelings for one of the 3 men. She just really loved the other 2 platonically, and so I didn't have to stress about if I was shipping the wrong ones, because usually in love triangles I ship the wrong one and then I get disappointed. And so the other 2 just had to give up and deal with it, and they were actually quite graceful about it, and I really appreciate it. I just really don't like immature people who think that their women friends owe them sex. And I also really enjoy a lot of other characters. There's a whole werewolf pack, and I enjoy a bunch of the characters from there. I enjoy only one of the vampires, but I think you're only supposed to like the one vampire. And I really like one of the Fae, and most of the others are kind of meh. And I really enjoy Mercy's day life that isn't her going off and solving paranormal problems, because she is a mechanic and my dad is a mechanic. So I find it really fun to read about someone who has that profession and is quite a bit like him. So that is what I read in April. I've been filming for 67 minutes. I hope this gets edited down a lot shorter. It should somewhat, because I can cut out all the parts when the pump was on. And now I gotta go eat dinner. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!